Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And yes, this is the second time I've actually recorded this video. The first time I thought it went perfect. Like it was like one of the best videos I've ever made. I thought it was good. I thought it was funny. And then I went to the editing bay and it was like all the audio was messed up, but I was like, it was like spits and spurts of it messing up. So I was like, I'll edit this part out, but it's still fine. I can still get the video. And then by the time I got like a minute in, I was like, nope, this video has to be trashed. The audio is unlistenable. And then I got really frustrated and was like yelling in anger at the computer. And then I look behind me and like Nami is in the bed. She's doing airplane ears. And I'm like, oh no, Nami. I'm mad at an inanimate object, not you. So then I felt bad. Anyways, regardless, Nami's fine. She didn't even leave her perch in the bed. She was briefly doing airplane ears. And then I was like, oh no, I'm a terrible person. But regardless, I did laundry, which is what everyone does to relax after they've failed at a video. If the audio for this doesn't work, I'm just going to delete my entire channel. Anyways, let's do this video, which is the top 5 things I learned from GarbAugust 2023. And if you watch this video and go, wow, this isn't as good as it could have been, that's because it isn't. It was perfect once, and this is the lesser version. Number 1, video game tie-ins are a bit of a mixed bag. So this shouldn't be surprise anyone. I was focusing on reading a lot of video game tie-ins for August. I thought, hey, this is a good time to kind of decipher this. I focused a lot on movie novelizations and movie tie-ins last year. So I thought, hey, let's dive into this and kind of see if it's like the same thing where I'm going like, oh, it's not trash. Or like, oh, there's a lot of things that are like worthy about this type of media content. I didn't like most of them. Like, I'm going to say 90% of them I DNF'd. But the ones that I did read and I did like, I did actually think are quite good. And I think that the dividing factor is there are good games that make terrible books, and there are terrible games that actually can make good books. I think what happens is what makes a good book and what makes a good video game are completely opposite. Because a lot of times, you have all these like mechanics. You take control of the action, thereby there actually is an element of storytelling in video game that is you are the person who is creating the story yourself, which can even happen in like a linear game, like even in like a, you're playing Super Mario where you're going from one side of the screen to the next. You choose when to jump, you choose how to jump, you can get hit at the right time, and like there's all these like little timing things, and like the story about how things are progressing is in your hands. Whereas, a novel, unless it's like a choose your own adventure book, it's a different beast entirely. And there are video games that I actually think are very fun to play, like say Gears of War. Gears of War, very fun video game. You have a chainsaw on a gun and you chop people's and you go boo 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 boo, and like it's a fun video game. The story of Gears of War is not good. It's like, we're angry men and we cannot emote properly because it's the early 2000s and no one's known about toxic masculinity, so we cannot be human beings. We must have the worst jokes and we're manly men and choppity chop, and it's like super boring. Whereas a video game that is bad, just straight up bad, Fire Warrior, which is a Warhammer video game, a first-person shooter that's basically unplayable, not a good game. The book, I haven't finished it yet, but the book so far, really fun, and is actually kind of like a commentary on first-person shooters in general. It tries to like look at what would it be like to do all the crazy things that you do in one of these video games, and what would it be like on the human psyche to like do what happens in a first-person shooter. And let me tell you, it wouldn't be good on the human psyche to do the things that you do in most of those video games. So it was just very funny to read about that, where it kind of is kind of taking the piss out of the idea of video games as storytelling devices and like what happens in them and like how we interact with them. And it's also just like a fun explodey book. So really when it comes to video game tie-ins, it depends on the spine. If it has a good backbone, if there's interesting world, if there's a good sense of like character and of time and place, you can make a good novel out of a video game. But if it's a video game that is made in like say maybe about 2006 or so, it's probably going to be bad, because back then all things are gray, and almost all main characters are like, I'm an angry, muscly man. And it's like, oh god. Like, reads like Men's Adventure, which, by the way, still sucks. Number 2. This is the GarbAugust, the only reading event that my father cares about. I don't know why. My father loves GarbAugust, and like literally every time I talk to him, he was like on the phone. Like last month, it was like, "Hey son, are you reading trash? You reading trash, son?" Like it's like that meme where it's like that kid is playing video games and his like dad opens the thing with like a cigar and a cup of coffee, and he's like, "Are you winning, son?" But for me, it was just like every time I called my father, he's like, "You reading trash, son?" And I'm like, "Yes, father. Yes." And that orc, quite adept at lovemaking. I don't know how to talk about... I'm not talking to orc smut with my father, but you get the point. I was reading a lot of weird books, so it's always strange when the topic of your family is like, you're reading them trashy books? Like, he's never commented or like been invested in any other reading event that I've done ever. But for some reason, GarbAugust, it's like every single phone call this month was like, you reading them trashy books, son? And I'm like, yes, father, I am. Number 3, fantasy. Is it actually good? Okay, so here's the thing. Modern fantasy to me is I can't tell anything about it. The identity of covers, while sometimes they look pretty, they don't tell you anything about the books. And I also don't even know if orcs are in books anymore. Like modern fantasy, it's always like, here is like a bunch of thorns, or like, here is a helmet. And I'm like, is the book about the helmet? Is this the adventure of helmets or helmet pants? That would be interesting, I guess. Is it a sentient helmet? Does it like go on adventures, goes to the movies? I don't know. The Adventures of Sentient Helmet? I would read that. But the problem with modern fantasy is it's like you can't really tell. Even books where it's like, here's a lady with a sword. You don't see what she's swinging the sword at. So I'm like, are there orcs in this? How do I know if this is the type of fantasy I like? Because I've discovered I do like fantasy, but I like fantasy in that it's like there's all these different species and all these different, like, you know, you got humans, you got orcs, you got trolls who have to be only spoken like trolls, apparently. I don't know. My brain is weird. Dwarves, you know, gnomes, all those things intertwined in one fantasy universe. And like, I want to read books where, you know, humanity is just as diverse and all those things as, you know, our world is, where there's a bunch of cultures, races, all that stuff. But I also want there to be like orcs and like other things. It seems like modern fantasy, there's always dragons, which is good. I like my dragons. Like, it's good. I like dragons. I'm pro dragons. But I can never tell, is there any other fantasy creatures, or dragons are just there? Like the Fourth Wing. I know there's dragons in that. Are there orcs? Are there goblins? Are there gnomes? Are there tap dancing llama people who come from the land of llamas and they're llamakin? I don't know. Are there? Because I'd read, if Fourth Wing has a whole subsection of llama people, I'm down. What do? They live on the plains? Do they have cool spit powers? God damn. Like, I would read that. And if they are, why is that not on the cover? I want a llama person riding a dragon. Anyways, regardless, this is not about whether or not llamas and dragons are in the thing. This is the thing where, you know, smut, you know, monster smut especially, you know there's monsters there. There is no doubt. You go, you look, and you're like, this ice planet, I see some snow, that's a ripped alien barbarian, I know, and there's a lady there. You know what's happening. Even book where it's like, so I married a lizard man. You at least know, when you're reading the book, that the lizard man, he's got a six-pack. It's important to know. It's important to know. But modern fantasy, there's none of that. Like, I don't know what monsters are in modern fantasy anymore. Or are they just like normal medieval stuff, but different? I don't like complicated magic systems, because I don't really want to know how magic works, because, you know, if I go to the Ren Fair and a man is doing magic shows, do people do magic shows at a Ren Fair? Regardless, this is my fantasy world. Yeah, there's orcs in my fantasy world. There's also orcs at this Ren Fair. We're not talking about them. Anyways, so there's this gnome magician at this Ren Fair that I'm at, and he's doing magic tricks. So, like, I don't want to know how that magic works, because I'm there for a show. I want to be like, wow, fireballs, they're pretty. But, like, it seems like a lot of fantasy is like, and she uses the kinetic energy to make the atoms rotate around in a 360 no-scopes, and that allows her to have fireballs. And I'm like, I don't want to know the rules. I want to know you know the rules as a writer. I want the writer to know the rules, but I don't want to, as a reader, I don't want to know the rules. It's why I'll never read a Brandon Sanderson book. Apparently those books like come with like a fucking 1,200-page rule book where it's like, this book only has 400 pages of story, but most of it's like why you could walk on water. And I'm like, I don't care. I just want you to walk on water. I don't need to know why you can walk on water. That's not entertaining. Okay, now, I know I'm getting too far into this because I look over at Claude, who's like laying on all the clothes I just folded, and now he's doing airplane ears. Whether I'm excited or whether I'm mad, the cat's be doing airplane ears. So, I guess that's a lesson in that. Anyways, I like fantasy where it's like a group of adventurers, their friendships, and, you know, there's orcs and goblins, stuff like that. That's fun. I like the D&D level fantasy. I don't know if they still make... Like, I don't know if modern fantasy is like that, though. So, tell me. Does the Fourth Wing have orcs? Maybe one of you fantasy readers can make me a website. That's just a thing you do for random people you watch on BookTube, right? You just make websites for them. Anyways, the website's going to be called Orcs Yes or No, where I can look up on any book, any fantasy books. I just type it in, go boop, 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 Ashes in the Star-Cursed King, beep, boop, 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 and then you look it up and you press the enter and it will say Orcs Yes or Orcs No. That's all I need to know. I need to know before I pick up a book if there's orcs in it. Because they don't arrive into covers anymore. Other than freaking Legends and Lattes, orcs is on the cover there. That's what I mean. I know cozy. They got cozy fantasy. They got the orcs. But other things, I don't know. And no one talks about it in the reviews. They just go, these characters have good friendships, or blah, blah, blah. But no one says there's orcs in there. That's all you fantasy booktubers out there, just take note. Every review should start with, are there orcs in this? That's all I need to know. 4, Twilight is fun and good, and I like Twilight. Sue me. Twilight is fun. Twilight has some problematic elements in it, but like none more so than most other books that people read for GarbAugust, and just go, well, like, because like Criminale reads the Gore series, and like Twilight is 100% more with it than that series. So, Twilight is just like a fun little vampire story. I think it captures being a teenager well. I feel like the people who like Twilight make the best memes about Twilight, and people who don't like Twilight make terrible memes about Twilight. And that's how you know if something's good. Because if people who aren't liking it are doing bad jokes, and people who do like it do good jokes, see, there you go. That's how something's good. Can you do good comedy about it? Check mark, check mark, check mark. Number 5. This is just something about GarbAugust. I think GarbAugust is too focused on vintage books. I just think that we need to open up the whole thing a little bit more, because there's a whole bunch of booktubers that I think would be way more into participating in GarbAugust and could bring cool things to GarbAugust in general, but the vintage everything and the more vintage focus is just going to drive some people away, especially like, vintage smut. No one who's cool reads vintage smut. All the cool people just read normal smut. And it's not like smut is getting Bram Stoker awards anyway. So, like, no one is, like, all of a sudden going, like, now, I'm me, Mr. Crititon of the Critics of the Man, blah, love smut now. And it's like, no, it's like smut is still looked down upon. And vintage smut is mostly terrible. So it's like, give something fun and still that trashiness that won't have something deeply offensive in it. Because literally, Paperbacks from Hell was one of the things, and I was like, oh, people, you gotta prepare people to go into Paperbacks from Hell. You can't just be like, hey, go here. Because, like, there's a lot of cool horror that, like, people who only participate in GarbAugust might go like, there's only trashy horror from the 80s. And it's like, no, there's fun trashy horror, like, in modern day. And I think people would be way more apt to read something like Clowns vs. Spiders than they would be to read Toy Cemetery, just for an example. It's just, I think that a lot of authors who are doing really fun, silly, cheesy, modern trashy stuff that you could be easily accessible is not really being as encouraged in the GarbAugust criteria as far as like the rules and everything like that. So I just think we should open it up a little bit more so you can get all of the cool booktubers here and there. Anyway, sorry this book was not as good as it used to be. Blame my editing software. Goodbye.